Security grips my arm before I can even close my laptop. "Sir, you need to come with us, now." The entire executive floor goes silent. 40 people freeze mid-breath. Every pair of eyes burns into my neck as the two guards stand on either side of me. Daniel Mercer is at the head of the glass conference room, hands in his pockets. He doesn't look at me when he speaks. "You're done here, Nathan." No explanation, no warning, not even the dignity of eye contact. I had built half of what this company called its future. 3 years poured into this building, into the systems running behind every screen on this floor. I had skipped holidays and missed my daughter's school play twice because this project needed me. Daniel Mercer erased all of it in 10 seconds, in front of everyone I had worked beside. They walked me past my own team, past the whiteboard covered in my diagrams, past the junior analyst who stared at the floor because she didn't know what else to do. As the elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse through the glass. Daniel was high-fiving someone. He thought he had just won something. My phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer, Carla Webb. "Do not sign anything. Call me immediately." If you're thrilled and can't wait for the outcome of this story to unfold it, please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment and turn on notifications. Let's dive into the story. The glass doors sealed behind me like a verdict. I stood on the pavement outside Vertex Solutions and let the cold air hit my face. My hands were shaking slightly, the way they do when your body processes something before your brain catches up. But I didn't turn back. I didn't give the guards inside the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. 12 years in military systems analysis teaches you one thing. The worst move in a crisis is reacting before you assess. Panic clouds judgment. Judgment is everything. I found a bench half a block away and sat down. I read Carla's message again. Then I called her. She picked up on the first ring. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said. I told her everything. Daniel's face, the guards, the silence in the room, the way nobody spoke as I walked out. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds. "Nathan," she said, in the particular calm of a lawyer who already knows something you don't. "They terminated you without reviewing your executive contract." I leaned back and closed my eyes. I had known at the moment the guards appeared. Daniel had moved too fast, and fast is exactly how people make the mistakes that cost them everything. "My name is Nathan Cole. I am 42 years old. Before Vertex Solutions, I spent 12 years as a military systems analyst. My job was designing communication and logistics infrastructure for operations where failure was not something you planned around. It was the thing you spent every waking hour making impossible. You built redundancies. You documented everything. You knew your contracts the way surgeons know anatomy. When I moved into corporate strategy, I brought all of that with me. Daniel Mercer never understood that about me. He saw a quiet man who preferred spreadsheets to boardrooms and read that as weakness. Most people like Daniel read quiet as weakness. It is one of the more expensive mistakes a person can make. This was not just professional. It was personal. Daniel had not simply fired me to cut costs. He had spent 3 months positioning himself to absorb the project I built. He presented my work in the boardrooms while I sat invisible. He used my data, my frameworks, my client relationships. Then, once the deal was close enough to touch, he removed me so he could shake hands at the finish line. The project he had just taken on was a $120 million infrastructure contract. Legally, it still had my name all over it. 3 days earlier, I had been sitting in the same boardroom. It was a Thursday afternoon. The kind where the light through the glass walls turns golden and executives look relaxed because the quarter numbers are strong. Daniel stood at the head of the table presenting my work. My data, my risk models, my phased deployment framework for the ArcLight Industries contract. He had changed the fonts and put his name in the footer. The executives asked good questions, ones I had already answered 18 months ago. Daniel used language I recognized because I had written it in briefing documents he had clearly memorized. I sat at the far end of the table, 3 chairs from anyone who mattered. Then he said it, almost as a footnote. "Going forward, we're restructuring delivery. We're moving ahead without Nathan's department in the direct chain." I kept my face completely still. Not one person asked why. Daniel moved to the next slide before the sentence had finished echoing. That was the moment I understood exactly what was happening. He wasn't restructuring for efficiency. He was building a clean exit ramp for me before anyone noticed I was gone. What he did not understand was that removing me from the chain did not remove me from the contract. The ArcLight Industries deal was not simply a large number on a proposal. It was a $120 million infrastructure contract covering the complete overhaul of ArcLight's data management and communication systems across 14 locations, the kind that takes years to build because the client has to trust you completely before committing to something that touches everything they run. I had spent 3 years earning that trust. I knew ArcLight's operations lead, Warren Briggs, personally. I had visited 2 of their sites and written specifications built around their exact workflows. The proposal was not generic. It came from knowledge that lived in my head and in my private project files. There was also a structural layer that made my removal dangerous for Vertex. The core systems were proprietary designs I had built. The integration protocols connecting ArcLight's legacy systems to the new framework existed only in my technical files. Daniel had taken the project, but he had taken the surface of it. The working machine underneath was still mine. And Carla had confirmed what I suspected about the executive contract I signed 3 years ago. I had read Clause 14B at signing and again 6 months ago when Daniel's behavior began to shift. Legally, I was still very much attached to this deal. Carla Webb had been my lawyer for 9 years. She delivered devastating news in the tone other people used to read grocery lists. I trusted her because she never told me what I wanted to hear. On that bench, with the city moving around me like nothing unusual had happened, I listened as she walked me through it. Your executive contract contains Clause 14B, she said, a project authority provision. Most companies forget it exists until something exactly like this happens. I asked what it meant in plain terms. If Vertex terminates your position without documented cause, any active project you hold lead technical authority over does not automatically transfer to company control. Project authority reverts to you as the originating architect until a formal transition agreement is signed by both parties. They escorted me out in front of 40 people. No paperwork, no documented cause. Exactly, Carla said. They didn't just fire you. Under that contract, they handed you the project. Daniel Mercer gave away a $120 million deal without realizing it. I sat quietly for a moment. Then I stood, straightened my coat, and walked to my car. I did not call Daniel. I did not send a single message. I went home, made coffee, and waited. The military taught me one thing above everything when it comes to conflict. Silence is not weakness. Silence is positioning. When you fire a signal flare, you reveal your location. When you stay quiet, the other side has to move first. And when they move without information, they make mistakes. Every time. Daniel expected me to react. He expected lawyers threatening action, angry emails, public accusations. He expected someone panicking. I did none of it. I did not contact Vertex. I did not respond to the administrative emails asking me to return company equipment. I forwarded those to Carla. I turned my work phone off and put it in a drawer. I spent the evening writing every technical detail of the ArcLight project from memory into a private document. Not because I needed to prove anything, because documentation is how I think clearly. Then I went to bed at a reasonable hour. The people who are truly in control sleep well. The ones pretending lie awake making plans. Daniel, I was fairly certain, was not sleeping. He had a $120 million deal, a client expecting seamless progress, and a system architecture he did not begin to understand. I just needed to wait for the first crack to show. It didn't take long. The emails started arriving at Carla's office by the next morning, not to me directly. My access to all Vertex systems had been cut the moment security walked me out, but Carla had already sent a formal legal notice to Vertex's general counsel, which meant their legal team now knew about Clause 14B. Once lawyers get involved, information moves in ways that are hard to control. A project coordinator named Felix, who had worked with me for 2 years, sent a message from his personal number that evening. Things are not going well up here. System access errors across 3 of the ArcLight integration modules. It can't trace the issue. I read it twice and put my phone down. I had built those modules with a layered architecture. Each component depended on handoff protocols that existed only in my project files. Without those protocols, the modules would appear functional in basic testing but collapse under real load conditions. Nobody at Vertex knew that except me. Warren Briggs at ArcLight had already sent 2 emails asking for a project update. He had also, according to Felix, asked specifically whether I was still leading the technical side. He was asking for me by name. They had locked me out of the building, but they couldn't lock me out of the problem. Warren Briggs was not a patient man when it came to his company's operations. He had agreed to a $120 million contract with Vertex for one reason. He trusted the technical team, and specifically, he trusted me. I had spent 3 years earning that trust the unglamorous way. Honest updates, calling him personally when something fell behind schedule, explaining problems in plain language without pretending they didn't exist. Warren respected directness. He had zero tolerance for polished language that says everything while communicating nothing. Daniel would handle Warren the way Daniel handled everything, confidently, superficially, trusting his ability to talk through situations he didn't understand. Felix sent me another message Thursday afternoon. Daniel took a call with ArcLight this morning. Warren asked about the integration timeline. Daniel told him everything was on track and the team was prepared for the live test next week. I read that and felt something close to pity. The live test was a full system demonstration, all 14 location integrations running simultaneously, feeding real data through the framework I designed. ArcLight had invited their own board members to observe. Daniel had scheduled it as a celebration. Without the integration protocols in my project files, the system would not survive 20 minutes under live conditions. He didn't know that. The test was in 4 days. I watched the demo fail from 43 miles away. Felix had shared a private observer link used for remote technical monitoring. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and watched the system status dashboard as the live test began. For the first 11 minutes, things appeared stable. Surface-level functions performed correctly. The load metrics climbed as ArcLight's 14 locations came online one by one. At minute 14, the first integration bridge failed. A data handoff between location 7 and the central hub stopped completing. The system tried to reroute, found no valid path, and began queuing requests. Within 90 seconds, the queue was full. The eastern cluster went dark. Then the cascade started. Each module, finding its expected connection unavailable, began throwing errors. Errors triggered safety shutdowns. Shutdowns disconnected the remaining modules. In 3 minutes and 22 seconds, the entire integrated system collapsed. Felix told me the boardroom went absolutely silent. Then one of ArcLight's board members leaned forward and said the words that made Daniel's face lose all its color. "Where is Nathan Cole? Millions of dollars. Months of preparation. A room full of executives from both companies." All of it ending in silence and a question about the man they had walked out of the building 4 days earlier. Daniel called me at 6:47 that evening. I looked at my screen. His name, asking for something it had never had to ask for before. I let it ring twice. On the third ring, I answered. I said nothing. I waited. He spoke first. His voice was different. The easy authority was gone. What remained sounded careful, like a man choosing his footing on unstable ground. "Nathan, we need to talk." "I'm listening," I said. "The test didn't go the way we planned. There are technical issues, and I think there are things only you understand about the system architecture." I noticed he said we, as if the failure belonged to a group. "I'm sure your team will figure it out," I said. A pause. "Nathan, this is a $120 million contract. ArcLight is threatening to pull the timeline if we lose this deal. If Vertex loses the deal," I said, correcting him gently. Another pause, longer this time. "Can we meet?" he asked. "Your legal team can contact Carla Webb," I said. "She's handling my affairs." I ended the call before he could respond. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen and felt something I had not felt in 3 years at that company. I felt exactly like myself. The morning after the failed demo, Carla received a formal communication from Vertex's general counsel requesting a meeting. Their language was carefully neutral, designed to sound cooperative, but reaching out at all told me everything. Carla called me to discuss our approach. They'll offer a consulting arrangement, she said, something that keeps them in control while using your knowledge to stop the bleeding. And what do I tell them? I asked, though I already knew. You tell them what you actually are, she said simply. That afternoon, on a call with Vertex's general counsel and 2 senior executives, Carla laid it out in her unhurried way. Nathan Cole is no longer an employee of Vertex Solutions. He was terminated without documented cause, without a performance review, and without a signed transition agreement covering the ArcLight project. Under Clause 14B of his executive contract, project authority over any active engagement, he held lead technical responsibility for reverts to him upon such termination. She paused before the final line. Nathan Cole is not a former employee seeking reinstatement. He is the current project authority on a $120 million contract. He is not a consultant you can hire. He is a stakeholder. The silence on the other end of that call was the most satisfying thing I had heard in months. Carla sent the full documentation to Vertex's legal team the next morning. She packaged it cleanly. The original executive contract with Clause 14B highlighted. The termination record showing no documented cause. The project authority filings listing me as lead technical architect on the ArcLight engagement. The timeline showing my removal occurred 4 days before a contractually scheduled milestone. It was airtight. I had spent 12 years in environments where documentation was the difference between accountability and chaos. Every decision logged, every agreement in writing, every specification properly attributed. Daniel had assumed I was just an employee with a non-disclosure agreement and a 2-week severance window. He had not read the contract. Nobody at Vertex apparently had. Most companies treat executive contracts as formalities. They draft them at the start, file them away, and assume the relationship will end gradually with paperwork both sides agree on. What they don't plan for is someone like me. Someone who reads every clause at signing and once a year after that. By 2 that afternoon, Vertex's general counsel confirmed receipt. 30 minutes later, a second message arrived. The board had been notified and called an emergency internal review. Daniel was about to have a very difficult conversation with people who had enormous amounts of money at stake. Felix sent me a message that evening. All hands emergency meeting. Daniel looked like a different person walking in. I didn't need details to understand the temperature in that boardroom. The board of Vertex had invested heavily in the ArcLight contract. They had approved budgets, signed off on timelines, and communicated projected revenue to their own investors based on the assumption this deal would close cleanly. They were not people who responded well to surprises, and what they had just learned was a very large surprise with a very specific cause. Daniel had removed the lead architect of the company's most critical contract without reviewing the engagement terms. No board approval, no legal review, no transition plan of any kind. He had then overseen a catastrophic live demonstration failure, witnessed by ArcLight's own board members. There is a quality to the silence in a room where powerful people realize they have been let down by someone they trusted. I had sat in enough of those rooms to recognize it clearly. The board asked one question that removed any remaining confidence in Daniel's leadership. Can we fix this? Daniel said yes. He had no idea how. They reached out to Carla on a Friday afternoon. Not through the general counsel, through the board's chairperson directly, a man named Arthur Voss, careful and deliberate. I had met him once at a company event and found him to be the rare executive who actually reads things before signing. His message was brief and different in tone from everything before it. Mr. Cole, the board would appreciate speaking with you directly regarding the ArcLight engagement. We recognize this requires a serious conversation and are prepared to approach it accordingly. I told Carla to confirm Monday morning and to make clear the conversation must cover both the contractual situation and the circumstances of my termination as one connected matter. Arthur Voss agreed within the hour. I spent the weekend doing nothing that looked like preparation. I took my daughter to Saturday basketball practice. I cooked dinner both evenings. I slept 8 hours each night. The people across the table Monday would arrive with structured offers, expecting someone who wanted something specific. What they were not prepared for was someone who had already decided the outcome and was simply there to confirm it. For the first time in 3 years, the company was waiting on me. I intended to use every minute of that. The Monday meeting was held in a smaller conference room on the 14th floor, away from the executive level. I noticed that immediately. Neutral ground, chosen to avoid the visual of me walking back onto the floor where I had been escorted out. Someone had thought carefully about optics. Arthur Voss sat at the center with 2 board members and a legal advisor. Daniel was not in the room. That told me more than anything else. Arthur opened by acknowledging my termination had been handled incorrectly. He used the word incorrectly, not unfairly. I respected the precision. I thanked him. Then I spoke. I did not ask for my job back. What was on the table was how the ArcLight project would be completed and who would hold authority over it. I was prepared to step in as full operational lead, not as an employee, not as a consultant. As the contractual project authority I already held under Clause 14B, formalized through a direct agreement between myself and Vertex. I placed a single sheet of paper on the table. My terms. 1 page. No title. No bonuses. Just authority, a clear accountability structure, and 1 line at the bottom that I watched Arthur read twice. Formal accountability review for the circumstances of my termination, including Daniel Mercer. Daniel pushed back. I expected nothing less. 2 days after the board meeting, Carla received a memo from Vertex's legal team suggesting my interpretation of Clause 14B was aggressive and contestable. The memo was polished and completely hollow. Carla responded with 4 pages of case precedent and a reminder that the clause had been drafted by Vertex's own lawyers and signed without amendment. We did not hear about contesting the clause again, but Daniel was not finished. He was arguing internally, telling board members my demands were an overreach, that I was using a technicality out of personal grievance. The board listened. They were obligated to, but listening is not the same as believing. Daniel had spent 2 weeks spending credibility he didn't have enough of to begin with. What he didn't know, and what Arthur Voss quietly communicated to Carla, was that the board had already approved an internal review. Not solely because of my request, but because when the general counsel started pulling documents related to my termination, other things had begun surfacing. Emails, decision logs, timeline records going back 8 months. The review was not just about how I was removed. It was about how Daniel had been operating for considerably longer than that. The board wasn't just hearing his arguments, they were building a file. The internal review took 11 days. I was not part of it. I didn't need to be. Companies like Vertex keep records of everything, and when someone with the right clearance starts looking, the picture assembles quickly. What surfaced was not completely unexpected. But seeing it formally documented made it concrete in a way that quiet suspicion never does. Daniel had been systematically taking credit for work that originated with others. My project was the largest example, but not the only one. A product initiative from the previous year carried his signature on final presentations despite originating entirely in another team. Budget decisions over 18 months showed a pattern of cutting corners on technical infrastructure to protect short-term numbers, the kind that look clean on a quarterly report and create expensive problems later. There were also emails between Daniel and 2 senior leaders discussing how to make my removal appear organic rather than targeted. The word organic appeared in one of those emails. I found that detail almost impressive in its transparency. The rushed termination, the failure to review contract terms, all of it pointed to the same route. Daniel had been moving fast because he knew that careful review would surface exactly what it surfaced. He had bet that speed would protect him. It did the opposite. Warren Briggs called Arthur Voss personally on a Wednesday morning. Carla learned about it through the formal communication chain. What Warren said, according to the summary she received, was direct and consistent with the man I had spent 3 years working beside. He said ArcLight had entered the contract based on specific technical capabilities and specific personnel. He said the live demonstration failure had damaged his board's confidence, and their risk team was reviewing the engagement. He said he had one condition for continuing under the current timeline. Nathan Cole leads the technical implementation. Not Nathan Cole consulted occasionally. Not Nathan Cole available by phone. Nathan Cole in the room in every meeting, making the technical decisions, with the full authority the job required. If that condition was not met within 5 business days, ArcLight would formally invoke the performance failure clause and begin the process of contract withdrawal. Warren didn't present this as a negotiating position. He presented it as fact. He was, as I had always respected, completely clear about what he needed and uninterested in language that softened reality. The board had no room left to move. Daniel's remaining arguments had been made irrelevant by the one person whose money sat at the center of everything. They had no choice. Daniel was removed from active oversight of the ArcLight project on Thursday. The board communicated it internally as a temporary reassignment pending the completion of the review. In corporate language, that phrase has a specific meaning. It means the outcome is already decided and the remaining steps are administrative. He was not officially terminated that day. These things move at a legal pace, not an emotional pace. But he was removed from every meeting, every communication chain, every decision touching the ArcLight contract. His file access was restricted. I heard about it from Felix in a few words. He came back from a meeting and his calendar was just empty. I sat with that image. A man who had spent years filling every room he entered, controlling agendas, occupying space, now looking at a calendar with nothing on it. There is a specific kind of humiliation in that emptiness that no public confrontation can match. He asked to meet with me that same afternoon. The request came through Carla, which meant he had finally understood the informal channels were closed. I told Carla to confirm Friday morning. I had been waiting for this conversation since the moment the elevator doors closed behind me. I wanted to have it without any hurry. We sat across from each other in the 14th floor conference room. Daniel looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping. The confidence he usually wore like a second suit was gone. In its place was something that tried to look like composure and failed. He sat with his hands flat on the table the way people do when trying to appear calm without feeling it. I sat with my hands in my lap. I had been calm since the bench outside the building. He spoke first. "This wasn't personal, Nathan." I said nothing. "You're talented. I always said that. I just thought the department needed new direction. You needed me out of the way before the deal closed," I said. Not angry, just accurate. He opened his mouth and closed it. "The project was always going to need me. You didn't understand the architecture well enough to know that." He leaned forward. "You're really going to take this from me?" I held his gaze, not with satisfaction, not with cruelty, just clearly. "You already gave it away. The moment security walked me out without you reading the contract, you handed it to me. I didn't take anything. I just didn't drop it when you let go." I gathered my folder and stood. He was still sitting there when I walked out. The boardroom on the 22nd floor looked different when you were leading the meeting. Same long table. Same city view through floor-to-ceiling glass. Same chairs and overhead lighting. But the geography of a room changes entirely depending on where you stand in it. 3 weeks earlier, I had been in this building as a man escorted out by security. Now, I stood at the head of that table with a complete technical recovery plan and the full attention of the board. I had spent 5 days rebuilding the integration documentation from my personal records, mapping every failure point from the demo, and drafting a recovery timeline I was confident would satisfy Warren Briggs within 3 weeks. Felix had shared the current system state through proper channels, now that I held interim project authority. When I presented, nobody looked at their phone. No side conversations. People asked questions and listened to the answers because the answers were grounded in something real. At one point, Arthur Voss said simply, "This is the clearest technical briefing this board has received on this project since the beginning." I thanked him and moved to the next item. The final decision was coming. Everyone in the room understood what it was going to be. We were simply completing the steps that led there. The board voted on a Tuesday. It was unanimous. I was appointed project director with full operational authority over the ArcLight engagement, reporting directly to the board rather than through the executive management chain. The appointment came with a formal letter, a revised project agreement, and a written acknowledgement that the circumstances of my original termination had been improper. Daniel was formally removed from his executive role that same afternoon. The board cited findings from the internal review related to conduct and decision-making standards. His departure was quiet. No company announcement, no farewell message. His name simply stopped appearing in distribution lists, the way a sound stops when you leave the room where it was made. I stood outside the boardroom after the vote and gave myself 1 minute of stillness. Not celebration, just stillness. The kind that follows a long effort finally resolving into what it was always meant to be. Felix sent me one message. "Congrats, boss." I smiled, put my phone away, and walked back to the project room. There was still a great deal to do. The project would not succeed because of a vote or a legal clause. It would succeed because the work was done correctly. But during those 11 days of waiting, I had made a decision that nobody in that boardroom was expecting. Arthur Voss requested a follow-up meeting the morning after the vote. He expected we would settle the permanent executive structure, where I would sit on the org chart, what my title would be. I let him reach his opening before I told him what I had decided. I was declining the permanent executive position. He stopped. "Nathan, the role is yours by any measure." "I know," I said. "That's exactly why I can afford to structure this differently." I placed a document on the table, a project ownership agreement, not employment, not consulting, partial ownership of the ArcLight project deliverables as an independent stake. A delivery share tied to successful outcomes with my firm, Coal Systems Group, registered the week of my termination, listed as the delivering technical partner. Vertex would retain the client relationship. I would hold technical ownership of the core systems and receive a share that reflected what I had actually built. Arthur read it twice. "You're not coming back," he said quietly. "I never left the project," I replied. "I'm just clarifying where I stand in relation to it." He was quiet for a moment. "They'll need you for future contracts." "Yes," I said. "They will." He understood then. They hadn't just lost control of the situation. They needed me now on my terms indefinitely. 6 months later, the ArcLight contract was delivered. All 14 locations were integrated and operational within the timeline I projected. Warren Briggs sent me a note after the final sign-off. "The system works exactly as designed. Thank you for seeing it through." I framed it and hung it in the office of Coal Systems Group, now a proper downtown space with 3 staff and 2 additional clients. Daniel's exit made little noise. His name appeared in an industry newsletter described as pursuing new opportunities. His reputation now carried a particular quality, the kind that travels between people who make hearing decisions. Felix earned a senior role in the restructured operations team. He had earned it. My daughter's basketball team made the regional finals. I was at every game. I thought about the moment the elevator doors closed and I caught that last glimpse of Daniel through the glass, high-fiving someone, certain he had won. He had not checked the contract. That act of arrogance was the hinge on which everything turned. My lawyer, my documentation, my strategy all mattered, but none of it would have meant anything if Daniel had simply paused and read what he signed. I was not escorted out of that building. I was handed everything I needed to walk back in on my own terms and rewrite the ending entirely.